As published on nondetail.com.
I have been troubled by these questions since COVID-19 pandemic struck, and after a lot of reading and analyzing, I may have some answers. However, since I am not an expert in this field, I look forward to experts validating each of these statements which I would be making now. So, without any further delay, let us look into what are they. Does virus mutate objectively to evade antibodies? Or it merely replicates? If it is smartly mutating, then how does vaccines impact the transmissibility? If it's a mere replication, then how does vaccines impact? If it's indeed smartly replicating, then shouldn't it be aiming at becoming more transmissible than more virulent? Then why are some experts warning us of more virulent strains which might make the third wave more dangerous? If it's not smart in its replication and just randomly replicating, then does the law of evolution ensure that more transmissible variants outcompete the other variants? And of course this question, why has SARS CoV2 spread so much more while the previous coronaviruses didn't? How does a virus mutate? While the idea of a virus mutating might sound scary, it's actually quite normal. Viruses mutate all the time. This is especially true of viruses that contain RNA as their genetic material, such as coronaviruses and influenza viruses. All viruses are made up of a bundle of genetic material, either DNA or RNA, that's covered by a protective coating of proteins. Once a virus gets into our body, usually through our mouth or nose, it latches onto one of our cells. The virus's DNA or RNA then enters our cell, where it can make copies of itself that go off and infect other cells. If the virus can copy itself and hijack enough of our cells without being wiped out by our immune system, that's how we get sick. Every now and then, an error occurs during the virus's copying process. That's a mutation. Most of the time, mutations are so small that they don't significantly affect how the virus works, or they make the virus weaker, Dr. Rhodes says. But occasionally, a mutation helps the virus copy itself or get into our cells more easily. If these advantageous genetic mistakes are included when the virus replicates, they're passed on and eventually become part of the virus's normal genome, Dr. Rhodes explains. We can see these mutations accumulate over time, and that's how we get new variants of a virus strain. If you get confused about strains, variants and mutations, think of it this way. New variants of a virus strain emerge through the process of mutation. In the media, the words strain and variant are often used interchangeably. This answers our question of whether the virus mutates smartly to evade human immunity or it merely mutates. So, it can now be said with some certainty that the virus just replicates. And since a virus makes some mistakes in its replication, it results in new variants. Some of these mutations end up being more transmissible and some become more virulent variants. In some rare cases, mutations of the strain could be both, more transmissible and more virulent. When the variant is more virulent, it would affect the host more adversely, here the human cells, thereby leading to a more severe disease. And when it's a severe disease, the person most likely would be hospitalized, leading to a possible death, or at least he or she won't be roaming on the streets. Which would then arrest the transmission of this virus variant, and eventually these variants die their natural death as they can't transmit much. So, a less virulent variant that causes mild to no disease resulting in asymptomatic positive cases, would transmit way better than a virulent and a more disease-causing variant. Applying Darwin's principle here, the more adaptable variant which is less dangerous would survive and the more dangerous ones wouldn't, as they are not adapted to the conditions. It may also be possible that the most of the genomic sequencing that we are currently undertaking would only catch the less virulent and highly transmissible variants. Why? Since the more transmissible variants would outcompete and spread more. Hence it is more probable that we catch these variants in the genomic sequencing samples when compared to the more virulent ones. So, if we have not seen a highly dangerous and virulent variant yet, it may not mean that it doesn't exist. Because these high virulent variants are self-destroying by making the host very sick and die out soon, hence they won't spread. Now, how did SARS-CoV-2 created a pandemic of this level while the previous coronaviruses didn't? An article published in The Conversation states, viruses walk a fine line between severity and transmissibility. If they are too virulent, they kill or incapacitate their hosts. This limits their ability to infect new hosts. Conversely, viruses that cause little harm may not be generating enough copies of themselves to be infectious. But SARS-CoV-2, the coronavirus that causes the COVID-19 disease, sidesteps this evolutionary trade-off. Symptoms often don't appear until after infected people have been spreading the virus for several days. One study of SARS-CoV-2 estimated that the highest rate of viral shedding, and therefore transmissibility, was 1 to 2 days before the person infected begins to show symptoms. Put simply, you only feel ill once the virus has accomplished its evolutionary goal, to spread. Viruses that are good at making copies of themselves, and then getting those copies inside new hosts, are more successful and become more prevalent until host immunity or public health efforts restrain them. The trade-off between virulence and transmissibility helps keep a pathogen in check. The very destructiveness of a virus keeps it from spreading too much. This has been the case with other pandemic pathogens, including Marburg, Ebola and the original coronavirus responsible for SARS. Outbreaks that consistently cause severe symptoms are more easily corralled by public health measures because infected individuals are easy to identify. SARS-CoV-2, however, can invade communities stealthily, because many infected individuals have no symptoms at all. COVID-19 behaves more like an STI. Looking at it this way, COVID-19 resembles a sexually transmitted disease. The infected person continues to look and feel fine while spreading the illness to new hosts. HIV and syphilis, for example, are relatively asymptomatic for much of the time they are contagious. With SARS-CoV-2, recent research suggests that 40 to 45% of people infected remain asymptomatic. And those carriers seem able to transmit the virus for a longer period. COVID-19 has another similarity to many sexually transmitted diseases. Its severity is not the same across hosts, and often it's dramatically different. There is evidence that the ability to fight the infection differs among people. The severity among strains of the virus might also differ, though there is no solid evidence of this yet. Even for a single strain of SARS-CoV-2, the virus can affect people in different ways, which could facilitate its spread. The SARS-CoV-2 virus, or any other pathogen, is not deliberately changing what it does in order to exploit us and use our bodies as vehicles for transmission, but pathogens can evolve to look like they are playing games with us. Studies show pathogens can express conditional virulence, meaning that they can be highly virulent in some individuals and less virulent in others, depending on host characteristics, like age, the presence of other infections and an individual's immune response. This might explain how SARS-CoV-2 escapes the trade-off. In some individuals, virulence is maximized, such as in older hosts. In others, transmissibility is maximized. Talking about HIV, even the HIV virus is evolving to become less deadly and less infectious, according to a major scientific study. The team at the University of Oxford shows the virus is being watered down as it adapts to our immune systems. It said it was taking longer for HIV infection to cause AIDS and that the changes in the virus may help efforts to contain the pandemic. Some virologists suggest the virus may eventually become almost harmless as it continues to evolve. Age, so far, seems the critical factor. Older people tend to get highly destructive infections, while younger hosts, although just as infectious, remain largely unscathed. This might be because different hosts have different immune responses. Another explanation is that as we get older, we are more likely to develop other illnesses, such as obesity and hypertension, which can make us more susceptible to harm from SARS CoV2. Regardless of the mechanism, this age-based pattern permits SARS CoV2 to have its evolutionary cake and eat it too, ravaging older individuals with high virulence, yet maintaining younger individuals as vehicles for transmission. Some studies suggest younger people are more likely to be asymptomatic. Both pre-symptomatic and asymptomatic carriers can transmit the virus. And because SARS CoV2 may be able to circumvent the typical trade-off between virulence and transmissibility, there may be little evolutionary pressure to become less severe as it spreads. So, contrary to what we have established, it is now possible that a more virulent SARS CoV2 variant might also become a more transmissible one. As COVID-19 virus has sidestepped the evolutionary trade-off between virulence and transmissibility. How does vaccines and other public health measures impact this evolutionary process? Whether it is smartly mutating or just mutating, at the end it is more likely that the variants which are more adaptable would survive. That is, the more transmissible and less virulent variants would enthrall. However, it is not a rule for this particular SARS CoV2 virus. So, the end effect of vaccines, irrespective of which evolutionary process the COVID-19 virus takes, the probability of transmission reduces, thereby chances of mutation goes down and hence the opportunity for more variants also reduces.